There ain't nothing like loving you, loving you, loving you. No liquid.
Tuesday night, minutes before 11:30 p.m., police say they showed up to this building at 2817 Foster Avenue. There, they found 24-year-old Tatiana Pettis shot in the left side of her neck. She later died in the hospital.
It's just crazy. Crazy and sad.
Neighbors tell me she was new to the building, only living here for just a few months. One person off camera told me he just saw her last Saturday, the smile on her face as she waved hello.
We never had a situation like this. You don't know who's being led in this place. Like, make it make sense. Who's moving in, who, it's kind of weird.
Neighbors still in shock say they believe the victim was also a mother. Meanwhile, sources close to police say the shooting was domestic in nature, and detectives are on the search for the boyfriend of the victim. But it's unclear who else was in her apartment at the time.
Who would want to hurt her like that? What was the problem?
Questions that so many others are now raising, including the loved ones of a 24-year-old woman who won't get to see another day.
On what should have been an ordinary summer night in Brooklyn, a single 911 call set off an investigation that would leave a family shattered. When police arrived at a basement apartment in Flatbush, they found 24-year-old Tatiana Pettis suffering from a gunshot wound to the neck. She was rushed to the hospital, but despite every effort to save her, she did not survive. Investigators quickly concluded this was not the act of a stranger. They believe the shooting happened during a confrontation inside the apartment she shared with the father of her 1-year-old daughter. Before officers reached the scene, the man they would later identify as the primary suspect had already disappeared. As the investigation unfolded, one question became impossible to ignore. What happened inside that apartment in the final moments before Tatiana lost her life? This is the story of Tatiana Pettis. Hello, and welcome to Only Crime Stories. Before we continue, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new case. To understand the tragedy, it's important to know who Tatiana was before her name appeared in news headlines. She was 24 years old and worked overnight shifts at an Amazon warehouse. Night work isn't easy. It means sleeping when everyone else is awake, missing holidays, and constantly adjusting your life around an exhausting schedule. But those who knew Tatiana say she worked hard because she wanted to provide a better future for her young daughter. Her little girl had just turned 1. Family members described Tatiana as someone who stayed connected to the people she loved. She looked forward to spending time with relatives in North Carolina, where a family reunion was planned. It was supposed to be an opportunity for her daughter to meet cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandparents, a gathering filled with laughter, stories, and new memories. Instead, that reunion never happened. Her family would make the trip to New York for a very different reason. Tatiana had recently been living in a basement apartment on Foster Avenue in the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn. She shared the home with her boyfriend, who was also the father of her daughter. According to investigators, his mother also lived in the residence. From the outside, nothing about the household appeared unusual. Neighbors later described Tatiana as quiet and polite. Most interactions were limited to a simple greeting while passing in the hallway. There were no reports of repeated disturbances at the building and no public indication that anything inside the apartment was about to turn deadly. Her father also chose not to speak extensively to reporters after her death. While declining interviews, he shared only a few words about his daughter. He simply said she was a good girl. Sometimes those few words reveal more than a lengthy interview ever could. They reflected the grief of a father trying to protect the memory of his daughter while facing an unimaginable loss. No one outside that apartment knew that, within hours, Tatiana's life would come to a sudden and violent end. Tuesday, June 30th, began like countless other days. People returned home from work, families settled in for the evening, and the streets of Flatbush carried on with their usual rhythm. Inside a 4-story apartment building on Foster Avenue, nothing appeared out of the ordinary from the outside. Behind the door of one basement apartment, however, events were unfolding that would soon draw police officers, detectives, and crime scene investigators to the address. According to investigators, sometime around 11:25 p.m., an argument broke out inside the apartment. A 911 call was placed, prompting officers from the local precinct to respond to the address. At that point, dispatchers knew there was an emergency inside the residence, but they had no way of knowing what officers were about to find. As police made their way to Foster Avenue, the situation inside the apartment reached a tragic conclusion. When officers entered the basement unit, they discovered 24-year-old Tatiana Pettis inside a bedroom suffering from a gunshot wound to the left side of her neck. The apartment immediately became an active crime scene. Emergency medical personnel rushed inside and began treating Tatiana before transporting her to Kings County Hospital. Every minute mattered. Medical teams worked to save her life, but the injury was too severe. A short time after arriving at the hospital, Tatiana was pronounced dead. The young mother who had spent her nights working to support her daughter would never return home. As detectives secured the apartment, they began documenting everything inside the residence. Evidence was photographed, witnesses were separated for questioning, and investigators worked to reconstruct the final moments leading up to the shooting. Very early in the investigation, detectives concluded this was not a random act of violence. There were no indications of forced entry. Nothing suggested a robbery. Instead, investigators believed the shooting occurred during a physical confrontation between Tatiana and someone she knew intimately. The focus of the investigation quickly shifted toward the person who had shared both the apartment and a child with her. But there was one major problem. By the time officers arrived, he was already gone. Within minutes of the shooting, the basement apartment on Foster Avenue was transformed from a family home into an active homicide scene. Officers secured the building while detectives and crime scene investigators began documenting every detail that might explain what had happened inside the apartment. Every room, every doorway, and every piece of evidence had the potential to answer one critical question. How had a young mother ended up fatally wounded in her own bedroom? According to information released during the investigation, Tatiana's mother was also inside the apartment that night. Police sources said she heard her daughter scream. Rushing toward the sound, she reportedly found Tatiana bleeding from a gunshot wound. Without waiting for emergency responders, she immediately tried to stop the bleeding while another family member called 911. Those moments were likely filled with panic and desperation. As emergency crews raced to the scene, every second counted. Despite the efforts of her family, paramedics, and hospital staff, Tatiana could not be saved. Back at the apartment, investigators carefully examined the scene for physical evidence. They photographed the bedroom, collected potential forensic evidence, and documented the layout of the residence to better understand how the confrontation unfolded. Outside the building, detectives began speaking with neighbors who had either heard the disturbance or had interacted with the family in the past. Several residents recalled hearing an argument shortly before police arrived. While none could explain what started the dispute, their accounts helped investigators establish an early timeline of the night's events. Others described Tatiana as quiet, polite, and respectful. One neighbor said their interactions rarely went beyond exchanging greetings in the hallway. Another mentioned she had only been living in the building for a few months. None of those neighbors expected to wake up to flashing police lights and a homicide investigation outside their doors. As detectives continued interviewing witnesses, another important detail emerged. Investigators found no indication that an unknown intruder had forced their way into the apartment. There were no early signs suggesting a robbery or a random attack. Instead, the available evidence pointed investigators towards someone who had been inside the home. Detectives now focused on reconstructing the final minutes before the gunshot, determining who was present, how the argument escalated, and what events led to the fatal shot. With each interview and every piece of evidence collected, one individual drew increasing attention. The father of Tatiana's daughter, DeAndre Nelson, the man who had been sharing the apartment with her, and the same man who was no longer there when police arrived. As investigators continued piecing together the events inside the apartment, their attention quickly turned to one person. This was not a case involving an unidentified intruder or a random act of violence. From the earliest stages of the investigation, police believed the answers were likely with someone Tatiana knew well. That person was the father of her one-year-old daughter. DeAndre Nelson and Tatiana shared more than a relationship. They shared a home, responsibilities as parents, and the everyday routines that come with raising a young child. To those outside the apartment, they appear to be an ordinary couple building a life together. But according to investigators, that ordinary life came to a violent end on the night of June 30th. Police later identified Tatiana's boyfriend as the person they wanted to locate in connection with the shooting. While authorities did not immediately release every detail of their investigation, they confirmed that he had left the apartment before officers arrived. That single fact immediately changed the direction of the case. Instead of questioning everyone who had access to the apartment, detectives were now searching for someone they believed could explain exactly what had happened inside the bedroom where Tatiana was found. The timing of his departure also became an important part of the investigation. Authorities have not publicly detailed precisely when he left or the route he may have taken after the shooting. Those details remain part of the ongoing investigation. What is known is that responding officers did not find him at the scene, and by the time detectives began gathering evidence, he was already gone. His disappearance raised even more questions. Was he acting alone? Did anyone help him leave? Did he contact family members or friends afterward? Those questions have not been publicly answered, and investigators have remained careful about what information they have released while the case remains active. One piece of information, however, brought a small measure of relief amid the tragedy. Tatiana and her boyfriend's 1-year-old daughter was not inside the apartment when the shooting occurred. According to investigators, she had been staying with relatives elsewhere that evening. Physically, she was safe, but in the hours that followed, her life changed forever. She lost her mother to an act of violence, and the man police were searching for was her own father. Regardless of how the investigation unfolded, the little girl would now face a future without the two people who brought her into the world living together to raise her. As detectives expanded their search, they began reviewing surveillance footage from the neighborhood, interviewing additional witnesses, and following every lead that might reveal where the suspect had gone. They knew who they were looking for. The challenge now was finding him before he disappeared for good. With every passing hour, the urgency grew, not only to locate the man at the center of the investigation, but to provide a grieving family with the answers they desperately needed. As detectives worked to uncover what had happened inside the apartment, Tatiana's family was forced to confront a reality no family is ever prepared for. Instead of planning the reunion she had been so excited about, they were now making arrangements to bring loved ones together for a funeral. The excitement that had surrounded seeing Tatiana and her daughter again was replaced by grief, unanswered questions, and the overwhelming task of saying goodbye to someone whose life had been cut short at just 24 years old. While investigators remained focused on the evidence, her family focused on remembering the woman behind the headlines. Tatiana's father chose not to give lengthy interviews to the media. In one of the few public comments he made, he declined to discuss the investigation in detail, saying he wanted to keep the matter private. However, he did leave reporters with a simple description of his daughter. He said she was a good girl. Those few words carried the weight of a father's heartbreak. Rather than discussing the violence that had taken her life, he wanted people to remember the person she had been. Other relatives were more vocal in their search for answers. Among them was Tatiana's uncle, who turned to social media in hopes of reaching someone who might know where the suspect had gone. In an emotional video, he pleaded with the public to come forward with any information that could help investigators locate the man police were searching for. His message wasn't driven by anger alone. It reflected the desperation of a family trying to understand how everything had changed in a single night. He spoke not only about losing his niece, but also about the child left behind. That little girl had celebrated her first birthday only months earlier. She was too young to understand why her mother never came home or why so many unfamiliar faces suddenly surrounded her. She had been spared the violence of that night because she was staying with relatives when the shooting occurred. But although she escaped the immediate danger, the consequences would shape the rest of her life. As she grows older, she will learn about her mother through photographs, family stories, and the memories shared by those who loved her. She will never remember Tatiana's voice. She will never remember being comforted by her after a bad dream or celebrating birthdays together as mother and daughter. Those memories were taken from her before she was old enough to create them. Back in Flatbush, neighbors also struggled to process what had happened. Many described Tatiana as friendly but reserved. She wasn't someone who attracted attention or caused problems. Several residents admitted They had never imagined something so violent could happen inside their building. For them, the flashing emergency lights, crime scene tape, and detectives moving in and out of the apartment were a shocking contrast to the quiet neighbor they had occasionally greeted in passing. As the days went on, the questions only grew louder. Why had the argument turned deadly? Could anything have prevented it? And perhaps most importantly, where was the man investigators believed held the answers? While Tatiana's loved ones mourned her loss, detectives continued following every lead, knowing that each passing day, without an arrest, made finding the suspect increasingly urgent. For the Pettis family, justice was no longer an abstract idea. It had become the only hope of finding some measure of peace after an unimaginable tragedy. With the crime scene processed and witness interviews underway, detectives enter the next phase of the investigation. Finding the man they believe could explain what happened inside the apartment became their highest priority. Unlike cases where investigators spend weeks trying to identify an unknown offender, police already knew who they were looking for. The challenge wasn't identifying a suspect. It was locating him before he disappeared completely. Investigators immediately began retracing the hours leading up to the shooting. Surveillance cameras from nearby buildings, businesses, and surrounding streets became valuable pieces of the investigation. Detectives worked to determine when the suspect was last seen, whether he left the neighborhood on foot or by vehicle, and if anyone had helped him after the shooting. At the same time, officers continued speaking with residents throughout the building and the surrounding area. Even the smallest detail could prove important. Someone may have noticed a person leaving the apartment in a hurry. Another witness might have seen someone walking away moments before police arrived. What seems insignificant to one person can sometimes become the missing piece investigators need to complete a timeline. As detectives followed leads, they also examined the suspect's personal connections. People rarely disappear without leaving traces behind. Friends, relatives, co-workers, and acquaintances often become an important part of an investigation. Investigators routinely review phone records, financial activity, surveillance footage, and other available evidence to determine where a suspect may have gone after leaving the scene. Whether those efforts produced immediate leads has not been publicly disclosed. What authorities did confirm was that the investigation remained active and that the suspect had not yet been taken into custody. With no arrest to announce, police turned to the public for assistance. Officials urged anyone with information, no matter how minor it might seem, to contact investigators or submit anonymous tips through Crime Stoppers. For detectives, public cooperation can make a significant difference in cases like this. A single witness may remember seeing someone running from the area. A nearby security camera may have captured movements investigators had not yet seen. Someone who unknowingly interacted with the suspect after the shooting may later recognize his photograph and realize the encounter was important. Every tip has to be evaluated. Every lead has to be followed. And every hour without an arrest increases the pressure on investigators to locate the person they believe holds the answers. Meanwhile, Tatiana's family continued living with uncertainty. They knew investigators had identified the man they were searching for. What they didn't know was how long it would take to find him, or whether the next phone call they received would finally bring news of an arrest. For the detectives assigned to the case, the investigation was far from over. The evidence collected inside the apartment told part of the story. Witness interviews filled in additional pieces, but there were still critical questions that remained unanswered. And until those questions were resolved, the search for justice would continue. As of the latest publicly available information, the investigation into Tatiana Pettis' death remains active. Detectives have identified DeAndre Nelson. They believe he was involved in the fatal shooting, but at the time of this reporting, no arrest had been announced. Law enforcement officials have continued asking the public for assistance while pursuing every available lead. An active investigation is rarely as straightforward as it appears from the outside. While the public often sees only press releases and brief news updates, investigators may be reviewing surveillance footage frame by frame, re-interviewing witnesses, analyzing forensic evidence, and following leads that are never disclosed publicly. That process can take days, weeks, or even months, depending on the evidence available. For Tatiana's family, however, time does little to lessen the pain. Every day, without an arrest, is another day spent waiting for answers. Every holiday, birthday, and family gathering now carries the absence of someone who should still be there. Instead of celebrating milestones with Tatiana, her loved ones are left preserving her memory through photographs, stories, and the hope that justice will eventually be served. Meanwhile, her 1-year-old daughter faces a future forever changed by what happened on June 30th. She will grow up hearing about the kind of mother Tatiana was from grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. They will become the keepers of memories she was too young to make for herself. As the investigation continues, authorities have encouraged anyone with credible information about the case or the whereabouts of the suspect to contact law enforcement. In investigations like this, even information that appears insignificant can help detectives verify timelines, locate witnesses, or identify new leads. Cases have been solved because someone recognized a face in a news report, remembered an unusual conversation, or came forward with information they initially believed was unimportant. Whether that will happen in Tatiana's case remains to be seen. What is certain is that investigators have not closed the file. The search for answers continues. And until every question has been addressed through the legal process, Tatiana's family and the community that has followed this case remain in a state of uncertainty. If significant developments occur, whether through an arrest, new evidence, or court proceedings, they will mark the beginning of the next chapter in this case. But for now, the investigation remains open, and the pursuit of justice continues. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next case.